There's some amazing people that you see on these videos working in places we could never imagine the hardship that they have to kind of walk through. If you're a regular viewer or a regular attender, you've probably noticed I've been away a couple of weeks. I was lucky enough to have a holiday down in Augusta with my lovely husband. So I drafted the majority of this sermon at a picnic table facing an almost perfectly calm Blackwood River. It's a pretty good office, quite a good spot to write a sermon based on a ripple effect, considering that when most people think of a ripple, it tends to be on water. The literal definition of a ripple effect is a situation in which like ripples expanding across water when an object is dropped into it, an effect from an initial state can be followed outward incrementally. So as I sat there watching the traffic on the river, most people I could see were kayaking. They moved through the water with barely a ripple. They made almost no sound, and they slipped through the water, leaving almost no trace. But by contrast, when a motorboat jets past, it tears through the water and leaves a V of churned up water and rippling waves that linger long after the boat has gone. As you go through your life, are you a kayak or a motorboat? Have you ever been asked that question before? It will make more sense by the end of the sermon. Have you ever watched an Olympic diving competition? They are masters of not making a ripple. They do somersaults and pikes, handstands and backflips, all of which are over in a moment, and if done correctly, sealed with a splash about as big as a fish burp. A tiny little ripple, almost unbelievable after seeing what they've just done in the air. But as much as I admire the skill it takes to be a professional diver, it sometimes is a little disappointing to see tiny splash after tiny splash. Have you ever heard of dodging? Now, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but dodging is a Norwegian sport. In English, it translates to death diving, but in Aussie, we would probably translate it to belly flop or cannonball. So I'm sure that definition gives you an idea of what dodging is about. The Norwegians take this competition very seriously. They've been running a competition since about 2008, according to their Wikipedia page. The basic premise is you jump off a high platform and you score points depending on how long you can hold a pose before curling up into a ball to hit the water safely, but with a big splash. Now, if I was running the competition, I would probably give you bonus points depending on the size of the splash, because for me, that's kind of the most exciting part of the cannonball. Do you like diving? What kind of diver are you? Are you all serious and poised and making a tiny splash? Or are you more joyful and you take a running jump and hit the water with a huge splash? Maybe like me, you're not even a diver at all. I am more a put my foot in a little bit at a time. I've never been a jump in with both feet person. Learning to ice skate when I was younger, I held on to the rim of the rink, revolution after revolution, for the whole time we were there, because I just didn't have the confidence to let go. When I'm snorkeling, because I'm new at it, I need a pool noodle and someone's hand to hold, otherwise I'm not going anywhere. And the same is true for my Christian walk. I admire the Christians who have the faith to do crazy things for God, crazy things that God's called them to do, crazy jumps into the unknown, like serving in far-off countries, walking on water, walking out of chains, preaching to a crowd of people that are ready to stone you, fighting a giant with a slingshot. And I'm sure you can think of many more examples from Bible times and even more contemporary ones. So I get a bit discouraged because there's a gap, and I feel like all I can do is take a little step. I can't do a cannonball, and a lot of the time, I even struggle with that little step. Like Winsome in the video we just watched, she said she had a real sense of having nothing to offer. Why would someone choose me to do that task? And too often, we believe that of ourselves. Too often we believe that we don't have enough or we're not good enough, which might very well be true to an extent. But thankfully, we don't have to do it all in our strength. What's the verse for this year's self-denial? Ephesians 3:20. Now all glory to God who is able, through his mighty power at work within us, to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. We might not have enough in ourselves, but whatever we lack, God is more than able to provide. And we give the glory back to God when he helps us through. We need to do our bit, follow his leading. To calm my nerves and anchor myself to trust God when I'm about to preach, I remind myself that as long as I do my best, God will do the rest. So even though there are many examples of those crazy Christians doing running jumps, cannonballing into what God calls them to, there is also precedent for taking a little step at a time. In Joshua 3:6-17, in the morning, Joshua said to the priests, "Lift up the Ark of the Covenant and lead the people across the river." And so they started out and went ahead of the people. The Lord told Joshua, "Today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you, just as I was with Moses. Give this command to the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant. When you reach the banks of the Jordan River, take a few steps into the river and stop there." So Joshua told the Israelites, "Come and listen to what the Lord your God says. Today you will know that the living God is among you. He will surely drive out the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites ahead of you. Look, the Ark of the Covenant, which belongs to the Lord of the whole earth, will lead you across the Jordan River. Now choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. The priests will carry the Ark of the Lord of all the earth. As soon as their feet touch the water, the flow of water will be cut off upstream, and the river will stand like a wall." So the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarephath. And the water below that point flowed on to the Dead Sea until the river bed was dry. Then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. Meanwhile, the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Lord's Covenant stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed as the people passed by. They waited there until the whole nation of Israel had crossed the Jordan onto dry land. Verse 10 shows the great things God has planned for them, the effect of the ripples that will start outward from that first step. The priests following the instruction to step into the water, but the instructions didn't say how to step into the water. How do you think they stepped into the water? Remember, they are carrying the Ark of the Covenant. How do you carry something precious and valuable? You do it carefully and slowly, right? These priests were also stepping into a river that was overflowing its banks. Were they stepping over trees? Was it an uneven area? Was it slippery? I imagine they had no choice but to step into that water carefully and slowly, a little step at a time. Particularly as it says in verse 10, the water below that point began backing up a great distance away. They didn't step into the water and it parted straight away. There was a delay. And they had to keep just stepping into that water, and eventually they were standing on dry ground. So they must have been stepping into rushing water, trying to keep their footing, trying to hold the Ark of the Covenant and all work together. It would have been slow going. And eventually, the reading says, they stood on dry ground in the middle of the riverbed. They must have just kept stepping little by little until they got that far. Isn't that encouraging? It's not always about the crazy, huge acts. Sometimes it is as simple as taking a little step, one at a time. This is an example of a ripple effect. It starts small, The instruction to cross the river turns into a few footsteps by the priests, and as a result, the rest of the Israelites could cross. Now, clearly it wasn't just the priest stepping into the river that caused the ripple. It was the power of God in that situation. They did their little part, and it changed the lives of so many people. Another example can be seen in John 6, 5 to 11. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. Turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread to feed all these people?" He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them." Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that going to do with this huge crowd?" "Tell everyone to sit down," Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. Afterwards, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. Do you ever think about the boy in that story? Do you think he was old enough to make his own lunch? Or do you think someone made it for him? I've heard a story about a little boy that one day asked his mum if she could make him an extra sandwich for school. And she said, "Sure, are you extra hungry today?" And he said, "No, there's a boy in my class who never has any lunch, so I've been sharing mine with him." That little boy can't save the world with his lunch, but think how much better he made his friend's day. One little moment of compassion can go a long way. The little boy that gave his lunch to Jesus fed thousands of people. The ripple can start from a humble beginning, and God can take it and take it further than we could have ever imagined. One of the early salvationist mottos was soup, soap, and salvation. If someone is starving, they are not going to be able to hear the word of God. They're not going to be able to hear it over their grumbling stomach or the crushing despair from life's troubles. And we might look at the monumental amount of need there is in the world and think, what can we do? But I urge you not to use that as an excuse to do nothing. God can take our little offering and turn it into so much. Imagine what your gift could do specifically for a person that receives it. Now, I don't know what everyone's finances are like, and I don't presume to tell you an amount you should give. That decision is between you and God. What I would like for you to do is think about how much God has blessed you and how you could share that blessing. What would you be able to joyfully give? Imagine how much good your donation could do. Put a face to the money you're giving. Now, we obviously don't know exactly where our money is going to go, but we trust that those who are in control of the funds are following God's leading and will send it to the right places. All our responsibility is to listen to God and to give our gift joyfully. If you don't have a lot extra, could you give $5? Or maybe even $5 for the next few weeks? I want you to imagine the face of a child who didn't have to go hungry because of your donation. Perhaps you could spare $10. Maybe that whole family could be fed, rather than maybe a parent going to bed hungry because all they had enough to feed was the children. What if you could put aside $20? Maybe that could go towards an after-school program where at-risk youth get food and an opportunity to learn about God and even skills to get a job to better their future. A donation such as $50 goes a lot further in those countries than it would here. So maybe that could go towards buying musical instruments, and they could develop a vibrant worship group passionate about singing and worshipping God. Imagine the ripple effect your donation could have. Children with full bellies and opportunities to know God, they could have their life turned around. They could concentrate at school and have hope for their future. Your action could start the ripple that could change their day, their week, or even their life. We see stories come out of self-denial where children were helped when they were young, and then they've become teachers, pastors, youth workers, because they wanted to help others because they were helped. Your donation can ripple out to change their life and change the next generation as well. Who knows where the ripple stops? If you have more room in your budget, perhaps you could consider larger donations, 100, 200, 500. Imagine where they could go. They could go towards projects that could change whole communities. We've seen in the past projects like drilling a bore so the community has clean water. Imagine the difference that could make to someone's life. One day, they are walking kilometres to their only water source, which is a dirty puddle that animals drink out of and swim in. They fill their container, not knowing if the water will make them sick, but without the water, they will surely die. Now imagine that because of your donation, they now have access to safe water right near their house. It takes them less time to fetch the water. They know it won't make them sick, and they begin to thrive. They use the extra time to make changes to their family. They can start making goods to sell, growing food. Their children can afford to go to school instead of having to dig through rubbish just to get by. Your donation could cause such a positive effect for so many families and even an entire community for generations. What if you even had larger amounts to give? Can you imagine giving 1,000 or more? The things that could be done. They could build a church. Would you get warm, fuzzy feelings thinking of all the people that had an opportunity to be saved because there was a place for them to meet and hear about the love of Jesus? You could be the reason that whole families become saved. Imagine getting to heaven and seeing this long list of people that you had an impact in saving. You might never meet them, but you could have a part in their salvation by a little gift. Our donations do not go to a faceless cause. They go to changing people's lives in ways that we could never do ourselves. And they have a greater effect than we could ever imagine. We can never know how far they ripple out. They might ripple from individuals to communities, and it could span generations. Have you ever felt the calling to go out to the mission fields, to go overseas and to actually go to those places, build houses, minister there? Did you want to go and God has said no? Or did your circumstances just prevent it? Do you want to do big things for God, but you don't know where to start? Or you feel discouraged by lack of progress? King David found himself in that position. He wanted to start a crazy project and build God a temple, a building that was worthy. But you know what? God told him no. In 1 Chronicles 28, 2-4, David rose to his feet and said, "My brothers and my people, it was my desire to build a temple where the ark of the Lord's covenant, God's footstool, could rest permanently. I made the necessary preparations for building it, but God said to me, 'You must not build a temple to honor my name, for you are a warrior and have shed much blood.'" Instead of being bitter about not being able to build the temple, he instead put his energy and money into preparing resources for the one who would build that temple. Do we have that same generosity of spirit? When we are told no or redirected by God, do we just turn away from the ministry? Or do we still give time and energy into building up those who will take up that mantle? Even though he had been told he would not build the temple, he put in so much time and energy preparing that it must have made the job so much easier for Solomon when it was time for him to build the temple. David was willing to give so much time and energy and resources to a project that he wasn't even going to be completing. And I think that shows a strength of character. People are by nature self-focused. We are myopic and short-sighted. What is closest to us appears largest, most important, and most worthy of supporting. And we may unintentionally ignore those things that are further away. Do we default to a mindset of, I haven't been called to that, I haven't been called to missions, and those people are so far away, I just won't do anything towards it, someone else can. Our mindset is more than just about giving a monetary donation during this period of self-denial. Do you find yourselves to naturally be self-focused? Do you think things like, I don't have young kids, so it's not my responsibility to do anything in that area? Instead, I encourage you to change your mindset. Drop a little stone, start a ripple. Let's make space for the children in our worship. Pray for the parents and leaders. Encourage the next generation. And let's see where that ripple can go. Do you sometimes feel like, I haven't been called to sing on stage, so I'll just sit in the pew. I'll expect to be blessed. Do you know you can cause a ripple there too? When you bring enthusiasm, it makes us on stage better. And alternatively, if you're not enthusiastic, it disheartens us. Your attitude can cause a huge difference, and it can cause a ripple that reaches further than you realise, either positively or negatively. You get to choose. Do you have an attitude of, well, I donated once to the Doorways program, and I'll not need to give anything for a while, and you never give another thought about donating to that cause? I know that personally, I literally am short-sighted. I have prescription glasses for short-sightedness. And I know that some days are much harder than others, and you might be in need yourself, and you're just trying to keep your own head above water. You don't have energy or resources to be donating to every cause. What I want you to think about, and I am including myself in this charge, what I want us to do during this self-denial appeal is work on developing a generosity of spirit in ourselves, seeking God and giving out of the resources that He has given us. And like I said, it is more than just money. In the children's self-denial, they ask the same question. What are some things that we can do that are more than just donating money? We could pray for those outside of our inner circle. Now, I'm quite bad with remembering to pray about a lot of people. If they're not directly in front of me, it's gone out of my brain. So I've been trying to make an effort to write down specific things that I want to continuously pray about so that I can remind myself that I actually wanted to be praying about them. We could be generous with our time, volunteering, or even generous with compliments and kind words to build people up. That goes a long way and costs nothing. We can work on spending more time with God and letting Him fill us. When we are full of God, we will naturally feel like we have more capacity to give. It will help us to give with a generous heart. God doesn't want us to give out of obligation or like we have to. He wants us to give joyfully and freely. We could be strategically generous with our money, setting aside a portion, preparing it so that when the appeal comes, we already have the chunk of money that we're going to give. Like David, we have it ready, we can give it joyfully, knowing it will be used for great things for God's name. So back to my original question. Are you a kayak or a motorboat? Do you know which you tend to be more like, or which you would rather be? I think naturally I am a kayak. I try to slip silently through life, not making a fuss. But you know what? For God, I want to be a motorboat. I want to do big things, and I want to create a big ripple. I want to get to heaven and be overwhelmed by all the people saying that I made a difference in their faith journey. Something I did or said helped them get closer to God. Or maybe what would be cool if we get to heaven and we get to see a highlight reel of all the ripples we made, people whose day we made better by just giving them a compliment or a smile, something simple. Because even something as small as that can make a big deal. In season 8 of Doctor Who, the Doctor says, "We're time travellers, we tread softly. It's okay to make ripples, but not tidal waves." Now he speaks of time travels that go back and forward in time. One wrong action and that wave could catastrophically change futures, cause things to change in unforeseeable ways. But even though that is a quote from a sci-fi show, it does ring true. We need to be careful with our actions. We are time travelers. We are just limited to moving in one direction at the speed of 1 second. But even with those limitations, we are still bound by the universal law of cause and effect, one of the 7 laws of nature. The definition of this law states that every single action in the universe produces a reaction no matter what. Every single effect within our world, upon our earth, has a cause, an original starting point. Doing something and doing nothing are both actions. You are always free to choose, but there will be a consequence or consequences to that choice. And the ripple effects caused by your action could travel further than you intended. Stephen Hawking is attributed to saying, "We are all time travelers, journeying together into the future, but let us work together to make the future a place we want to visit." The 7th Doctor, you might be able to tell I'm a little bit of a Doctor Who fan. I was named after one of the companions, you should know. So the 7th Doctor said, "Every great decision creates ripples. Like a huge boulder dropped in a lake, the ripples merge and rebound off the banks in unforeseeable ways. The heavier the decision, the larger the waves, the more uncertain the consequences. The size of the boulder we throw into the water is limited, and we can never know for sure what that effect will be, whose lives will be touched or changed. But there is someone who did what I think is the biggest cannonball of all time into the river of time, and that is Jesus. The ripples of his life are still rippling out and covering us even now. The priests we spoke about earlier stepped in, and a nation walked through. Jesus jumped in on our behalf and bought salvation for the whole world. Are you one of those who've made a decision to let Jesus into your life? If you do, he will be like a huge boulder dropped into a lake. There will be ripples, and as we allow those ripples to shape us, we will have the capacity to cause positive ripples for other people. Those ripples could be showing Jesus to someone and they come to know him too. Maybe it could be through donating to appeals like the self-denial, causing ripples of Jesus' love to cascade through countries we will never visit. There could be souls that get to heaven because we were generous and our prayers and our resources went towards them. It could even be walking alongside someone on their journey and encouraging them. Jesus is the ultimate example in giving. He gave it all for us, and it is our privilege to give out to others from the fullness that he has given us. One little stone will make a tiny plop, but if we all give together, those ripples will be felt far and wide, strengthened and multiplied through the power of God. We might just imagine the faces of maybe one family that we might help with our little donation. But God knows exactly where your donation will go. He knows the weight that will be lifted off that person, that situation, when their needs are met. And it should be our joy in taking part, in stepping in and causing stresses to lift and blessings to pour down on people. So will you be a kayak or a motorboat? Will you slip through life not making a ripple? Or will you be willing to make a ripple? Make a splash. Let the grace of God ripple out through all you say and do. As we sing our next song, and over the next few weeks, I hope that you can think and pray and make a commitment for what resources you have the capacity to give. What God is asking you to give. And imagine the blessings that can ripple out when God takes our offering and does what only he can do. He can use our small offerings and use them to change people's lives. The memory verse for self-denial, Ephesians 3:20. Now all glory to God who is able, through his mighty power at work within us, to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think. The next song is called For the One. It might be new for a few of you, so join with us if you can. Otherwise, feel free to just contemplate the words. It can be quite confronting to sing, and it asks a lot of us. But through Jesus, we have been given a lot. And instead of just keeping it to ourselves, we should let that love ripple out from us, and God will use our efforts to further his kingdom and his purposes.